The silver SUV had barely pulled into the gravel driveway before I knew they weren't here for a friendly visit. They were here because this land was now worth millions. 5 years ago, my son and daughter-in-law had dumped me here and never looked back. They left me with a leaking roof, rotting barns, and a patch of dirt nobody wanted. Now they were climbing out of that car like they already owned the place. My daughter-in-law didn't even say hello. She just looked at me and said, "You've got 72 hours to sign the papers." I didn't argue. I just wiped my hands on my apron and locked the front door. They'd forgotten one thing: this farm hadn't saved me. I was the one who brought it back to life. When that silver SUV kicked up dust in the yard, I knew my peaceful years were over. My son Lucas and his wife Blair stepped out. She was wearing pristine white sneakers, the kind that had no business being on a farm. 5 years ago, they'd handed me the keys to this dilapidated property because it was a liability they didn't want to deal with. Back then, it was just worthless dirt to them. Now that I'd spent every waking hour turning it into a thriving event space and a lush lavender farm, they were suddenly back on my doorstep. Blair looked around her eyes, scanning the renovated barn and the cars parked by my guests. "You've really cleaned the place up," she said, skipping the hug. "But we're definitely going to have to pave this driveway. It's killing my shoes." I raised an eyebrow but kept my mouth shut. I wiped my hands on my apron and gave Lucas a nod. He looked exhausted. He wouldn't meet my eyes, choosing instead to stare at his feet. They walked into my kitchen like they still lived there. Blair immediately went to the fridge and helped herself to a bottle of the expensive organic apple cider I kept for my cafe guests. "Lucas probably texted you that we're staying for a bit," she said, pouring a glass. He hadn't, but I just nodded. I knew how this game was played. "The guest room upstairs is open," I said, leaning back against the sink. Blair made a face. "That tiny attic room? No way, it's too stuffy. We'll take the master bedroom on the first floor. You can move your things upstairs. I mean, it's just you, right?" She spoke like it was already a done deal. Lucas stayed silent, waiting to see if I'd fold. I took a long, slow breath. I didn't cry, and I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached out, took the full glass of cider from her hand, set it back on the counter, and looked her dead in the eye. "The master bedroom is mine. You can take your bags to the attic, or you can find a hotel in town." Blair's smile curdled. Lucas swallowed hard. The vacation had officially begun. The next morning, I was up before the sun. As the light started to hit the lavender fields, I heard noise in the kitchen. When I got downstairs, Blair was at the stove, frying eggs, my farm eggs, the ones I needed for the breakfast I served to my paying bed and breakfast guests. Scattered across the table were folders she'd pulled right off my office shelf. My private ledgers. "What are you doing?" I asked, calmly pouring myself a coffee. Blair didn't even turn around. "Just getting a handle on the books. Lucas and I talked last night. You're working way too hard for someone your age. We're going to take over the management side of things. The wedding revenue is great, but your labor costs are ridiculous." She tapped a pen against my invoices. I didn't feel angry. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. For years, they hadn't called. No, "How are you?" No help when the pipes froze in the dead of winter. Now they smelled money and wanted the wheel. I didn't argue. I didn't justify myself. I walked to the table, snapped the folders shut, and tucked them under my arm. "This is my office," I said firmly. "From now on, the door stays locked." Blair let out a sharp, nasty little laugh. "Don't be ridiculous. We're family. Lucas has a right to know what's going on here." After all, this is all going to be his someday anyway. She set the plate of eggs on the table with a thud. I pulled my keys from my pocket, walked to the office door, locked it, and dropped the keys into my apron. Then I turned back. The food in the big fridge is for the cafe. If you're hungry, the grocery store is 5 miles down the road. Buy your own. Lucas came downstairs, yawning, just as Blair's face turned a deep shade of red. Your mother is being completely uncooperative, she hissed at him. He looked at me helpless. I took my coffee and walked out to my garden. Before they could take another inch, I had to build my walls invisible, but made of concrete. It only took 2 days for the truth to come out. Blair and Lucas ignored every rule I set. They didn't go grocery shopping. Instead, they went out to dinner in town and tried to put the bill on the farm's tab. I called the restaurant owner immediately and told him I wasn't covering it. When they got back that night, the air was thick with tension. We sat on the porch. It was a warm evening, the air thick with the scent of summer and dried herbs. Lucas cleared his throat. Mom, we need to talk about something serious. Blair crossed her arms. Lucas made a bad investment, she said bluntly. He lost money. A lot of money. I looked at my son. He was staring at the floorboards. How much? I asked. Pretty much everything Dad left me plus our savings, he mumbled. We had to give up the condo in the city. We've got nothing left. Blair leaned forward. That's why we're here. This place brings in enough. If we rent out the guest rooms year-round and expand the cafe, we can pay off the debt fast. We've already got a plan drawn up. I took a sip of water. They really thought my life's work was their life raft. This is my farm, I said quietly. My work. I built this while you two left me here to rot with a caved-in roof. Blair rolled her eyes. Oh, please don't start with that old story. We're here to make this professional. You're pushing 70. You're going to need a nursing home soon anyway. This is a fair deal. A fair deal. They were stealing my home, calling it management, and already picking out my room in assisted living. Lucas said nothing. He didn't defend me. He let his wife say the cruel parts and hoped I'd give in like I always used to. I am not sacrificing this farm for your mistakes, I said, my voice steady. Blair stood up so fast her chair screeched against the wood. You don't have a choice. We're all you have left. She was wrong. I had myself. The next morning brought a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Blair was waiting in the kitchen, full makeup on, ready for battle. Lucas sat there like a statue staring into an empty mug. On the table sat a printed document, not a legal one, but a contract she'd clearly cobbled together from the internet. Let's make this quick, Blair said. The situation is dire. Lucas is drowning. We need cash, not flower arrangements. She tapped the paper. We've contacted a real estate group. As it stands, the farm is worth millions. If we sell, we clear the debt and buy you a nice small apartment in town. I looked at the paper, but didn't touch it. I'm not selling. Blair's expression hardened. We aren't asking. We're telling you what has to happen. You have 72 hours to sign this so we can bring the realtor in. If you don't, we're leaving. She paused for dramatic effect. And we aren't coming back. You'll grow old here all by yourself. No visitors, no help when you fall. You won't have a son anymore. Lucas flinched but remained a coward. That was the weapon: isolation. Guilt. Years ago, that might have broken me. When I arrived here 5 years ago with empty pockets, I cried myself to sleep from the loneliness. But the woman who cried back then was gone. The dirt under my fingernails had made me tougher. I looked at my son. Is that how you feel, Lucas, sell the farm, or I lose my son? He avoided my gaze and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It's the only way, Mom. I didn't feel pain anymore, just an icy resolve. I nodded slowly. 72 hours. Fine. Blair smirked. She thought my quietness was a white flag. She thought I was folding because I was scared to be alone. She didn't realize that once a plant has deep roots, you can't just yank it out. The moment Lucas and Blair left after breakfast to go for a walk in town, I went to work. I didn't have time for tears. If you want to survive on a farm, you have to be practical. They expected a broken woman who would spend 3 days weeping before signing. Instead, I picked up the phone. First, I called a locksmith from the next town over. He agreed to come the following afternoon. Then I went to the hallway and gathered their expensive jackets and shoes. I didn't put them in their room. I took them out to the bunkhouse, a small rustic cabin at the edge of the property. It was clean but Spartan. No luxury, just a bed, a dresser, and a tiny bathroom. It was a long walk from the main house. That afternoon, a supply delivery arrived for the cafe. When the driver unloaded the crates, I had him move the heavy stock directly into the reinforced pantry behind my office, a room only I had the key to. The days of Blair raiding my supplies were over. I took all the cash from the farm store register, counted it meticulously, and locked it in the floor safe. Then I went online and canceled the joint credit card I'd kept for Lucas for emergencies. A few clicks and the account was frozen. No words, no explanations, just facts. When they returned that evening, I was sitting on the porch peeling potatoes. Blair marched into the kitchen. A minute later, I heard her yell, "Where's the coffee? And why is the pantry empty?" I stood up and walked to the door. "I moved the supplies. Like I said, you're on your own for food." She snorted. 2 more days. Play your little games while you can. This will all be ours soon enough anyway." Lucas stood in the doorway looking drained. Deep down, he knew something was wrong. My silence was making him jumpy. He knew my loud anger, but this calm, absolute control was something he'd never seen. On the second day of the deadline, Blair got cocky. She invited some of her old friends from the city over. Without asking me, she'd told them they were taking over the farm and wanted to show off the event barn with coffee and cake. I only found out when 2 luxury SUVs pulled into my yard. 4 women climbed out laughing loudly in expensive sundresses. Blair rushed out to meet them, hugging them theatrically. "Welcome to our little country estate," she shouted across the yard. Lucas stayed in the shadows. I was in my vegetable garden, pulling weeds and watching the show. Blair led the group straight toward the big barn. I wiped my hands and followed at a distance. Blair reached for the heavy wooden doors and shoved. They didn't budge. She rattled the handle, but the heavy-duty padlock held firm. "What the?" she hissed. She turned and saw me approaching. "Open this door! I have guests!" I stopped a few feet away. The barn is for paying customers only. It's been cleaned and prepped for a wedding this weekend. Nobody goes in until then. Blair's friends looked down at their feet, embarrassed. "You're humiliating me!" Blair yelled. "We're taking over this place. Open it!" I shook my head. As long as my name is on the deed, I dan who walks through those doors. You're welcome to sit on the bench by the pond if you like. I turned my back and walked away. No debate. I heard Blair cursing behind me, but she was powerless. She didn't have a key, and she had no authority. Half an hour later, the SUVs went flying back down the driveway. Blair stormed into the house. Lucas came out to find me in the garden a few minutes later. "Did you have to embarrass her like that?" he asked quietly. "You could have just let her have that one thing." I looked up at him. "Respect is earned, Lucas. It isn't something you demand." The afternoon of the second day brought the biggest shift. While Blair locked herself in the attic and Lucas moped on the porch, a white locksmith van pulled up. The locksmith was a guy I'd known for years. I greeted him and told him to get started. Lucas stood up. "What's he doing here?" I looked at him. "He's changing the locks. Front door, back door, and the office." Lucas blinked, confused. "Why we have our keys?" "Exactly." When the locksmith was done, I paid him in cash. Then I grabbed the 2 suitcases I'd packed earlier from their room and set them outside the door of the bunkhouse cabin. I went back to the main house and locked the heavy new front door from the inside. 10 minutes later, Blair was pounding on the wood. I opened a ground floor window. She was standing there, face purple with rage. "My key won't work." "What is this?" "Let us in." I leaned against the window frame. "Your bags are at the cabin by the woods. You can stay there for the remainder of your 72 hours. "That's illegal. You can't just kick us out," she screamed. Lucas stepped up beside her, looking completely lost. "Mom, please, just open the door. You're guests, not tenants," I said, matter-of-factly. "And guests who don't respect boundaries don't sleep under my roof. The cabin is open. It has electricity and a bed. That'll do for your final night." I closed the window gently but firmly. I heard Blair screaming for a while, but I didn't listen. I made a cup of tea and enjoyed the silence of my kitchen. For the first time in days, the house felt like mine again. I was back in charge. The next morning at exactly 10 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. The 72 hours were up. I'd already finished my coffee, swept the porch, and cut fresh flowers for the cafe. I felt strong. I opened the door, stepped out onto the porch, and locked it behind me. Lucas and Blair were standing on the steps. Blair looked like she'd survived a war. A night in a cabin without central heating clearly hadn't agreed with her. Still, she held that crumpled contract in her hand, trying to look like she held the cards. "Time's up," she said sharply. "We want your signature. You've seen we're serious. Sign this, or we leave right now, and you are officially on your own for the rest of your life." Lucas looked at me pleading. "Mom, don't make this hard. It's for the best." I took the paper from Blair's hand. I didn't even read it. I folded it once, then again, and tucked it into my apron pocket. Then I pulled a different piece of paper out and handed it to Lucas. He took it hesitantly. "What's this?" he asked. "The bill for your stay," I said. 3 nights. 2 in the main house, 1 in the cabin, plus the food and utilities you used. I gave you the family discount. It's exactly $420. Blair stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You're charging us for visiting your own mother. You've completely lost your mind." "I'm a business owner," I corrected her softly. "That's what you've been trying to tell me for 3 days, isn't it? You used my time, my energy, and my resources. This is a business. And people who stay here pay." The words hit home. The mask of control finally fell off Blair's face. Blair lost it. She crumpled my bill and threw it at my feet. "You heartless bitch! Your own son is going bankrupt and you're handing him a hotel bill. We're done, we're leaving, and you'll be begging us to come back when you're rotting here alone." She turned on her heel and stomped off toward the cabin to grab their bags. Lucas stayed behind. He looked down at the crumpled paper in the dirt. For the first time since they'd arrived, he didn't look like a smug city guy looking down on me. He looked like a lost little boy. His shoulders slumped. "Mom," his voice cracked. "Do you really have nothing left for me? Not even a little bit of sympathy?" I looked at him. My heart ached because he was still my son. But I couldn't be soft. If I gave in now, they'd spend the rest of my life draining me dry. I love you, Lucas, I said quietly, but I won't let myself be destroyed by your mistakes. I built this place from nothing while you had forgotten I existed. I have sympathy for you, yes. But sympathy doesn't pay the bills, and it doesn't build character. He swallowed hard. We don't know where to go. We barely have enough for a month's rent. Then you're going to have to work, I answered. Hard, like I did. There are jobs everywhere if you aren't too proud to take them, but you aren't staying here to run over me. I reached down, picked up the crumpled bill, smoothed it out, and pressed it into his hand. Venmo me when you get your first paycheck. It's the principle of the thing. He didn't cry, but his eyes were wet. He finally realized he'd hit a wall. I had drawn my line in the sand. He turned around without a word and walked slowly toward the car. An hour later, I heard their engine roar to life. The silver SUV rolled slowly down the gravel drive and vanished around the bend of the county road. I stood on the porch and watched the dust settle. There was no big drama, no tearful goodbye, just the quiet certainty that a toxic chapter was finally closed. I took a deep breath of the country air. The farm was quiet, but it was a good living silence. The hum of bees in the lavender, the wind rustling through the old oaks. I went back into the kitchen, turned on the radio, and started kneading dough for tomorrow's fresh rolls. My hands felt strong and full of purpose. That afternoon, the weekend guests started arriving. The cafe filled up with laughter, the smell of roasted coffee, and life. A young woman asked me the secret to such a beautiful place. I just smiled and told her that good things take time, and you have to take care of the ground you stand on. I didn't hear from Lucas and Blair for months. Later, I heard through family that Lucas had actually taken a job at a logistics center to start chipping away at their debt. Blair had to get a job too. Reality had finally caught up with them. They didn't get their millions, but maybe they learned something more important. 4 months later, I saw a notification on my phone. A deposit of $420. The memo line just said one word, thanks. I didn't feel a sense of triumph, just a deep, lasting peace. Sometimes I sit on my porch in the evening, looking out over the golden sunflowers, and I think about the woman who arrived here years ago with nothing but a broken heart. She thought she'd been abandoned. The truth is, she'd been planted. And what you plant, if you tend to it, grows roots that no one can ever pull up. I'm exactly where I belong.